Hey, this is Zach Roberts, and I'm here with Aaron Cynic, and this is the Visu.News podcast, episode 27. And for the first time in a little bit, I think that we're not only doing a podcast, it's been over a month, but even more so, we're doing an episode that is not what the hell is going on in Chicago?
Listen, I think that's been our last 3 episodes.
Yeah, I know.
And I've been what the hell is going on in Chicago, and you know, I have a feeling that you know how I roll, so I'm sure I'll find a way to tie it.
Well, of course, I mean,
I think to Chicago. I mean, come on.
It's no problem there. Chicago is also a city that we should care about. So.
Allegedly, that
I don't know. I just wanted to make it sound really condescending, but I'm from Syracuse, so it's not like it's like Mayor de Blasio running against Mayor Pete here. So
what a how okay wait I honestly, this week has been so busy and crazy. How many Democratic candidates? Literally everyone is running.
Okay. I'm actually announcing next week. My dog is too young. I forgot you can't run for president. Which, by the way, if you hear squeaks in the background, it is not my toys, it is my dog's toys. So yeah. I don't know why I don't have any toys. That was quick. But yeah, no, de Blasio is running. The governor of Montana is either announced or announcing, which, if ever a dude is ever the vice president running immediately, is the dude from Montana. But he actually has like a decent record for a middle of the road. If you're going to have a vice president, like, you want the dude from Montana probably. But as opposed to, another 4 years of Joe Biden. But
oh, good Lord. I mean, I know that we have plans for this show, but seeing as we are now in full 2020 electoral mode for the next 540 some odd days, right? I think is what we're at.
Yeah. Assuming that Donald Trump or whoever concedes or takes the victory, and that it doesn't go into a recount, and which I'm thoroughly convinced that we're going to have a 2000 style election in 2020, just for the 20th anniversary. It's like really good, branding and that sort of thing. So
I mean, why not get the
Blu-ray release out of it?
We're doing the greatest hits these days, but there is a piece that I have slowly been working on that I don't know when I'm going to actually drop it or where it's going to be, because it just keeps getting longer, and it's just called How Are They So Bad at This? In reference very specifically to Biden, and quite a few other candidates, or just Democrats in general. It all started with Nancy Pelosi coming out and saying, like, well, we don't, the old, we need to stick to the center, we don't want to move too far left, whatever. And they just keep building on this, middle of the road, bullshit.
I mean, 2000 again. I mean, I think that we also have to delve into the fact that there's a 50-50 shot that we're gonna go to fucking war with Iran in the next 3 months, as well. But I feel like John Bolton is on TV all the time. We're talking about invading a, kind of obviously not Middle Eastern, but that world again. We're talking about, running towards the center. We're talking about, it's just literally, I'm like, wow, I feel like I'm 18 again, except,
everything. Well, except everything is
40 pounds heavier, and
and everything is turned up to 10 and 20 times worse.
Exactly.
Because one of the more, and I really don't actually want to dunk too hard on this, but I kind of feel it necessary, where because I like Elizabeth Warren. I think Elizabeth Warren has a lot of really great policy ideas, and people should be listening. The party should be listening to her, with the exception of make endless war more eco-friendly. which you know is something that more or less was, you know, what was tweeted this week. And it's just like, okay, again, that's where we're at now. You know, we're at the point where you know, we're talking about just completely, I mean, we're still doing, you know, we're still imprisoning, you know, tens of thousands, if not more, of immigrant families. And, you know, we're talking about a complete and total reversal of Roe v. Wade and, you know, the most restrictive you know, abortion laws that are passing with just a small minority of people who are in power. And the quote unquote hashtag resistance is, you know, going, well, wait, you know, well, let's find a middle ground.
Let's have a sex strike.
You know, I mean,
which I will argue. I was just like, I was like, when I was like in college and the war was, you know, the war was happening, and I read Lysistrata, and I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. Like, women should do that. And that would be totally a thing. And then, you know, never mind the fact that like the woman governor that signed in Alabama's restrictive abortion law, or basically complete ban of abortion. She's a woman, and you have Hillary Clinton and all these people like talking about war and talking, and it's just like, wait a minute, that doesn't really work. Yeah, no. And 50% of, you know, the majority of white women voted for Trump. So yeah, I don't know how that's going to work. Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
also, like, you know, it also treats, you know, women as, you know, someone who like sex is punishment, and which has been one of my favorite things on Twitter has been all of the men who keep telling on themselves. We're like, well, most of the women I know don't enjoy sex.
Yeah, I mean, like, there are a lot of there have been a lot of really incredible cell phones.
Yeah,
but you know, but again, you know, the sort of like, you know, broader stroke here is that, you know, we have gone so far right that it's just incredible. You know, there was and of course this was, you know, Jonathan Chait who wrote it, but you know, what Joe Biden is teaching Democrats about Democrats. And a friend of mine was telling me today is, you know, what Biden is teaching Democrats about Democrats is that they're Republicans. And your baseline Republican is just an actual fascist at this point. And so, you know, that's why, and it's just, you know, I feel like, you know, we're what, 27 episodes into this show, and this has been a reoccurring theme for 27 episodes of this show, and that those have gone on over, I don't know how many years at this point, but quite a few. And it just, you know, there is no bottom. There, you know, you know, every time you're like, okay, well, you know, I'm on the floor. Okay, well, I'm in the basement. Okay, well, I'm under the floorboards. Now I'm in a hole under the floorboards, and now I just keep
digging. One of these times, I'm gonna get out of here.
I mean, I'm in the sewer. Now I'm below the sewer. I didn't know there was a below. You know.
Well, I mean, Nancy Pelosi now is also talking about that. You know, that being pro-choice is not a bar that we should set for Democrats. Which, I mean, it never was. There's been a ton of Democrats that aren't pro-choice, but at least you had John Kerry, who ran as I'm personally would not, you know, he had, I think was, if you're going to have a centrist statement, I think it's one of the best. There's like, personally, I do not, you know, I don't know. Personally, I wouldn't want my wife to have an abortion. I'm trying to remember what his exact wording was, because it was 2003 or 2004 or something. And, you know, whatever, you didn't have to be that articulate about these things. Like, you know, accepting the fact that it's the woman's choice to have an abortion or not to have it. But he, you know, said it's like, but I wouldn't want to put that on anyone else, which was kind of always the, like, okay, at least that's kind of the Democratic line. Like, you can run as anti-abortion, but you can also run as, you also had to go asterisk, Roe versus Wade is
the law of the land.
The law of the land.
Right.
And that's it. Like, no questions. We're not fucking with that. No changes. But now it just seems to be, fuck it. You put a D next to your name, fucking run, go for it. That's it. It doesn't matter.
I mean, we have no standards,
but yeah.
Like,
yeah.
you know, it is. I mean, yeah. So it's, you know, it is rough, and so you know, and I think this this little sort of discussion about, you know, again, how fascist America has become is a great lead into, you know, this, you know, our next segment, which should be what the hell is going on in Albany. Because you had quite the epic adventure over the weekend.
Yeah, no, it was super weird, and I won't say fun because it's never fucking fun, but it was interesting. Which is basically been the last 4 years of my life. It was interesting. But yeah, no, I don't even know how. I saw a link somewhere about it was from a leftist, like, by the way, these things are happening, sort of organizing thing, where it was just like about you know, fascist or, you know, fascist adjacent groups that are having rallies or whatever. I forget even what the link was, and I couldn't confirm whether it's actually was happening or not until finally, like, I did the stupid thing and actually went to just Patriot Prayer's fucking website. And I was just like, well, wait a minute. Like, I tried to use my sources and try to find out, like, locally, like, goes around, and nobody knew anything about it, and nobody had, you know, nobody got back to me in time. And then finally, yeah, I found out, and Patriot Prayer, Joey Gibson was traveling to Albany, New York, of all places, to hold a pro-life rally for the innocent, in the New York State's capital, which was weird. Because again, like, just as a person who's covered mostly exclusively East Coast stuff, this is the first, I think it's probably my first interaction with, I know it's my first interaction with Joey Gibson at all, but it was that sort of, I think it was my first interaction with Patriot Prayer, because they mostly stay on the West Coast. They're kind of busy trying to beat people up in, or you know, in Portland. But yeah, so I showed up, of course, you know, a half hour early, because I learned my lesson from Charlottesville, where we showed up like on time and shit had already started, getting completely fucking insane. And there was like fucking 3 people there, like a half hour beforehand, but they had this entire huge park, completely cordoned off, bunch of cops all around, like down the street at another park. This is in like the state capital area, so it's all like big open parks or big open areas. And like that horses ready, and nobody had riot gear or anything like that, but you could tell the cops were like, oh, like, where Albany, in my experience at least, is not like a super protest riot town sort of thing. Like, they don't know. I don't think that they would know what to do necessarily, other than, you know, beat heads or something. But keep waiting. One other person with a media tag, who is comes over, and we chat like awkwardly because we don't know each other. And we're like, wait a minute, how did you hear about this? How did you hear about this?
That's always fun.
And she was just like, she's like, hey, do you mind like watching my back? And I was like, yeah, no, you do the same to me. Okay, cool. Because it was one of those awkward things where it's like I know a bunch of people in Albany that are either lefty journalists or anti-fascist related. And so I thought I'd at least have my back on, you know, at least to be like, okay, well, cool. I don't know if any of these guys know who I am or whatever as well. So I'm always a little awkward on who might show up. And the moment I saw a bunch of Proud Boys show up too, I was like, oh shit. But what ended up happening, a half hour gets in, and finally, like, I go over to where the guy Joey Gibson is, and yeah, like 8-10 people are there, and then like another half hour goes by, and another like 15 show up, and then finally like 8 more drift in and everything, so it ends up being like 28 or 29 people. And so that was the entire rally. They just kind of like got into a circle and prayed. They were kind of blasting some like weirdly, I don't know, like pop spiritual music in the background, on the speaker. And so it was this weird mix of you had Patriot Prayer, Joey Gibson, you had oh my god, I forget her name. She was at the cider riot. She's this short little blonde woman. Maria or something. I forget. I already forget her name. It's inconsequential anyway. But she was there, and then there's like two other Portland, fashy celeb type people that were there that I probably should know.
That's there is a question there. Should you?
Well,
Is there
what I
value in
do,
knowing who
I
these...
should know.
Well, yeah, no. It's you should always know what you're covering.
Well, no. I just mean in general, like this is my world, unfortunately now.
Yeah.
So like I've been very I've been trying to get out to Portland to cover to kind of cover the scene a little bit more, but I just haven't gotten the financing to get out there. Somehow Joey Gibson, on the other hand, has gotten the financing to. He was begging for airline, or no, it wasn't airline miles, for buddy, for anyone who works in the airline industry, for buddy passes, so he could travel more. Which I don't know after this rally whether anyone's going to support him, because it was again 28 people on a Saturday afternoon. It was a gorgeous day too. So it was like none of those normal excuses. I will give him, he did outnumber Unite the Right 2. He did have technically more people than Unite the Right 2. The difference is that all of the anti-fasc groups in Albany area just decided not to show up because it would give them what they wanted. And later on, I found out just the other day. They're like, oh yeah, we totally knew about it. Like we just didn't show up because it was going to give them what they wanted. They wanted that live stream and the whatever. And so like I didn't interact with them all. I just took photos. Actually at the end I got into an argument, which I'm surprised it hasn't appeared online yet, but I got into an argument with one of them about, who was claiming Proud Boys weren't violent. And that Joey Gibson and these guys weren't, essentially white nationalists, white supremacists. And I was just like, this is ridiculous. Yeah, and of course, he immediately fell into the, America is, because it was talking about Western chauvinism, and it was like, America banned slavery. And I'm like, yeah, but it had it.
You had it for several hundred
taking it away. It was like, but we were the first. I'm like, no, you weren't. Britain did it before you. Most of Europe did it. It was like, well, it's like Africa, and I'm like, so almost a lot of Africa did it too. Like, also Africa was under the fucking under fucking colonial rules, so you can't really. It was one of those. I'm like, I don't know. I just started laughing because he kept repeating, cycling these arguments. One of the Proud Boys did, and it was like one of those. I'm like, fuck, I forgot. I don't know how to argue with you guys because everything you say is fine. Like,
well, but that's. That's the thing, though.
How do you? It's like, where's your evidence? And I'm like, what?
Literally,
the Earth is round. I'm sorry.
Well, but I think that speaks to sort of a bit of a larger kind of point of this, is sort of going about how one covers things like this, and how how journalists make a decision as to whether or not this particular thing is newsworthy, and then further, like, okay, well, we've decided, we're going to cover this thing. How do we cover it? Because of course, these guys love every platform they can get, and spin.
And that's I actually, because after covering it, and after the fact that like I didn't talk to Joey Gibson because I didn't know really why I would talk to him. Honestly, I hate to say it, like I was just like, why would I waste my I know what you're saying. I listened to you speak. I have recording of what you said there. So I have everything I need from you, and anything else you're going to say is more spin about your fucking bullshit. And also a person who's under a $1 million potential lawsuit right now is probably not going to say much about anything else. But he's being sued by the owners of Cider Riot for trying to start a riot there. But so I actually took, because I had an assignment from Nation of Change, and I almost just said, hey, guys, this isn't worth covering it. It's just not. It wasn't a big thing. It wasn't, if you had a Unite the Right too, you had the massive counter protest, and that to me, like, that's kind of what I mainly focused on in my story. And then like I briefly talked to Kessler about DeAndre Harris, and he said some bullshit about DeAndre Harris, and basically I just pulled those quotes out and put them in context, and that was it. But this piece, which I was really worried about how this piece was going to go over, because it was one of those, I worked on it, I missed my deadline. I worked on it some more, got drunk for the second time, working on it, and kind of just knocked it out, rewrote everything and knocked it out in one fell swoop, because I was just like, you know what? The only thing that this deserves is complete and utter fucking snark. And just cover the facts. Everything I said in it is truthful. Everything is factual. It will pass a fact check, but like, I'm putting everything into the mocking context that I think it deserves. And, you know, it's one of the things I love about Nation of Change. I don't think that Truth Out would allow me to do that necessarily. I don't know, you know, just like most publications, I don't think would allow me to do that. And honestly, if I was working for, you know, a straight publication, you know, like the Times or something like that, I probably would have said, oh man, there's just nothing, you know, it really wasn't worth it, because it wouldn't be worth it to give this sad showing for a man who has, you know, he claims to have this massive following, you know, and can't get fucking more than 28 people to show up. And then also you have the Proud Boys showing up in clown outfits, as well, as if, because this clown thing, it's, you know, you can search it online on what it means, like it's a 4chan 8chan kind of thing, and it's like kind of the next, I guess, step of Pepe the Frog, would you say? Like,
I mean, I didn't even get the, like, I did not get the sense of, and I weirdly don't actually know. I mean, I guess, yeah, it's the next big thing that, you know, fascists are doing, is tweeting clown.
Yeah, it's like, yeah. No, I was just, it's just confirmed. But it's basically, that's their next step on kind of mocking the ridiculousness of like everybody calling them violent and everything like that. Again, there's articles written about it on places that can explain it better than me. I will say the one thing I lied about in this piece, and I will admit that I lied about it, is saying, because I said, and they were dressed up as clowns for some reason. And I know what the reason is, but honestly, I still don't really know why they're doing it. In the same way, I don't know why Pepe the Frog turned into some fascist symbol, and things like that, you know? So it's like, that was the only place where I was just like, because I had a bunch of people send me like, oh, by the way, this is what it means. And I'm like, actually, yeah, I know what it means.
Yeah, we know.
I'm like, no, I just
it's
because
ridiculous.
Honestly, it pisses people off. Like, and that's the only thing that I put in there about it. But yeah, no. And so like, and you know, the other thing too is that like, I have recordings of them talking about the Reproductive Health Act in New York State, which actually expanded kind of reproductive rights for women in New York, which actually was like a really kind of draconian state when it comes to abortion rights, up until like this year. Which is actually something that really always surprised me whenever I've, you know, researched these things. I used to work, full disclosure, I used to work for a reproductive rights group, Lady Parts Justice. So I'm definitely biased on this. I'm also, you know, but yeah,
you know, that is the whole other train of, you know, conversation that we could get into, as far as, you know, perceived bias and things, because, you know, again, to paraphrase the Hunter quote, you know, objectivity, you know, true objectivity only exists.
Well, I mean, this is also, by the way, like, I should say, not only because this is actually, it's interesting that this happened, and then immediately this week it was boom, 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 Georgia, Alabama, and then I think Missouri just passed something as well, or at least is getting to those levels, and like, have passed these things. So I've been listening on NPR. They had somebody who was a pro-life or pro-anti-choice organizer on, and they just let them speak for 3 minutes straight about what they wanted to say. And then they were like, oh, thank you for coming on, and moved on, and then had somebody else. And then I was watching MSNBC, and then they have another just pro-life person who they let them speak for whatever. And then, as opposed to, which at least usually what NPR does, is have a counter, which they have like somebody from the other side, you know, to talk about and kind of counter whatever the right winger said. They'll have a, you know, a supposed left wingers, or they won't have a left winger, a centrist come on. You go, well, actually, those numbers are wrong. they just had a person from the Constitution Center in DC, in Philly or DC, Philly, on to talk about how abortion is a constitutional right now, and it was just weird because of, and then they explained Roe versus Wade, which is a problem that we have about Roe, is a lot of reproductive rights people have about Roe versus Wade, because Roe versus Wade doesn't protect a woman's right to have an abortion per se. It protects their privacy, and then within the asterisk of so Roe versus Wade like needs to be dealt with in a way that like we need to actually certify that it actually means this, because this is one of the things that's really worrisome about all of these different states passing these laws and passing such restrictive things, is that once it gets up to the Supreme Court, what is this court that has Gorsuch, that has Kavanaugh, that has Roberts as the head, going to do with, well, it's about privacy, and yeah, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, no, it's, again, we're talking about, the sort, like, we're not even, I think 20 years ago,
yeah,
you could safely say 20 years ago, and even more, there's always been this sort of element of creeping, fascism and creeping, whatnot. But we've moved into an era where it is a fucking rush. We are just, and again, and it's, specifically with abortion, the majority of the country, is for protecting a woman's right to choose, while it's a small segment of evangelicals who and other right wingers who have the loudest megaphones, who incidentally also, of course, at the same time, will talk about how they are the most persecuted and oppressed people. Despite controlling literally all of government, and having some of the largest media networks. That's part of the grift. And so now we're just, we're literally, America is tripping over itself, to become more fascist.
That actually, the grift, which is something that's incredibly important, because I thankfully had a quick conversation with online with David Newart, who's author of Alt America, The Rise of Radical Right in the Age of Trump. Sorry, I think we're having oh my God, we're having, sorry, I don't know if you can hear we're having a helicopter low helicopter flyover from Fort Drum, which happens about 3 times a week. Usually it doesn't happen at 9 o'clock at night though. But anyway.
So the deep state is,
well, I'm just saying, like, as we march towards Fort Drum is one of the like lead places that sends people out. Like, basically, if you get shipped at Fort Drum, you're at least somewhat likely going to the Middle East. So it's always like, whenever it's like there's a lot of deployments and stuff going on, I'm always just like, great, are we gonna go to war with Iran tonight? Like,
I mean, there is that. I mean, there is that. I mean, this really does kind of have that. People have been making comparisons, with Iraq, and I think those comparisons are well placed, because it really does have that kind of feeling. Like, I mean, I remember in the build up to Iraq, literally wondering, like, okay, when's shock, is shock and awe happening? Or, I mean, are we going to war today? Are we going to war tomorrow? And then we did. And it's just like it has that same sort of feeling to it now, which is absolutely fucking, once again, horrible and terrifying.
And it's been really fascinating to watch cable news right now, because not only do you have them continually talking about, well, this is what the Pentagon and this is what sources are saying, but we don't have evidence for it. And you're like, okay, well, you're still reporting it, like, and you're not reporting it within the context of we have to go. This is not, it's like, look, we've been here before. And we have to learn on how to report these things because you kind of, like, if the president says we found this or whatever, you have to report that to some level. And you have to report it within a box of, okay, so no little piece. People can't just turn on and catch the last 10 seconds of it and go, holy shit, we're going to war. Like, oh my God, they found,
found weapons of mass destruction.
And whatever. And they're just failing miserably on it, to the point that it's amazing the big thing that's amazing to me is that I was watching Chris Matthews, because I hate myself. And so I was trying to like put it in the context. If anyone I was a big Chris Matthews fan in the early 2000s, because I was just that generic poli-sci major and I loved politics, and you didn't have a lot of just like political talk shows like you do now in the early 2000s. You had like, oh my God, I'm blanking on the name of that roundtable show. But you had a couple of roundtable shows. Yeah. You didn't really have, I don't think Crossfire came until like another, but like I'm talking about like 2001, 2002, and early 2003 even. And Chris Matthews was like the guy that's been there since the dawn of fucking time. Like he had already in the early 2000s, I think, been on air for 15 years or something, doing the same exact goddamn thing. And he was one of the big just, oh, well, we're going to war and we're believing everything the Bush administration says. Phil Donahue got booted off the air because he dared on MSNBC to doubt what President Bush was saying about, the mushroom cloud and everything like that, in saying that we're finding weapons of mass destruction or whatever, we have evidence or whatever. But Chris Matthews was just, chugging along, believing everything. And this time around, he's now like, well, we have to take everything to context and we have to do it. And I'm like, dude, you just don't. And the fun thing is that he did a whole segment on John Bolton. And I can't believe that's fun. But he did a whole segment and he only played clips from Fox News where John Bolton's going, well, we know that they have, this, and we want to follow up, and we know that Iran is helping them or something. It's like he was talking about Iran, and I'm like, dude, I'm pretty sure that you could have played some clips from the Chris Matthews show in 2003 that would have also shown context into what you're talking about. But we want to forget that you're actually a fucking war hawk when it's a president that you don't mind. But Donald Trump bothers your, because or politics. Donald Trump doesn't fit into the Reagan, Kennedy, Carter model. So.
Well, let's not forget Matthews specifically. See, I have this, and of course, my memory is faded over over 2 decades and innumerable bottles of bourbon. But it's one of those things where I have a very strong memory of seeing Chris Matthews in the early 2000s. Just chugging along with war, liking Bush, and he really liked Bush. In fact, he said, quote, we treat this guy Bush with respect. I happen to like him. I voted for him at least once. And is just somebody who, that in itself, who, this person who was arguably the most conservative person on MSNBC at the time is now seen as some sort of, broad, liberal figure.
Yeah. He's I would say a classical liberal, but that doesn't mean that. But like, as in a liberal in the classic sense, in the way like the Jack Kennedy, like the sort of thing, like he. If somebody said, well, the way you talk is very Kennedy-esque, he would probably wet himself. He'd be that excited. Which I was like, yeah, you don't anyway. But Bobby would have probably punched you in the face. But
I mean, so that's the thing. Even we're so here we are, 20 years later, talking about a build up to yet another war. And meanwhile, while there are still troops all over the place, including in Iraq. So we're just in the era of forever war now. And people are acting like we're making the same fucking mistakes all over again. And I think this goes back to earlier when talking about quote unquote bias or whatever. I mean, people, the right always claims, well, the media is so liberal and so biased, and it's like during the lead up to the Iraq War, you had to dig if you wanted to find, and strong anti-war voices on cable news.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually something, in maybe like even a little more broader, that's decent that's good to talk about, because I don't remember the statistic off the top of my head, but when you compare, I think you tweeted it out earlier today, just about cable news audiences not being representative of America at large. And I know that Dave
Crenshaw.
No, Dave Weigel.
Dave Weigel,
earlier tweeted, you don't see Trump racing to MSNBC to reach the 54% of voters who backed someone else in 2016. Cable news audience is a synonym for America. And that's just it.
Well, I mean, that's the thing that I fucking caught though, because Elizabeth Warren said basically that she's not going on Fox News, and because they represent, basically it's a hate channel. And then Congressman Crenshaw, the guy with the eye patch, who I guess is cosplaying as a pirate president, I'm sorry, Congressman. Well, I'm sure one day he'll be president. But because Saturday Night Live fucking worships him now, because God forbid they made a joke about him. Jesus fucking Christ. But he said, well, she's talking, she's, saying, basically she's saying that half the country is evil. And I'm like, Fox News does not represent half the country. Like Fox News viewership, which is enormous and terrifyingly large for a cable news channel. Sean Hannity has on a good night, he gets like 3.2 million, which is a huge fucking number for a cable news program. I'm not taking that away from him. But in a country of over 300 million fucking people, 3 million is not half. And it doesn't even represent half of the Republican Party. And that's something that I think we have to try to remember when we're talking about this, is that, Fox News, I mean, it's because of the trickle down and the massive media that goes around it, that the moment that they say something and then Daily Caller writes about it, and there's this whole, network of conservative media, that's why like that probably reaches a much, much larger number between Breitbart and everything else. And obviously there's a lot of, crossover and, on a Venn diagram of horrible, but we're not talking about half the country when you call Fox News fucking evil.
It is, again, all of this is just sort of it's been a hell of a few years, man.
It does feel like it's been a few years since like the last time we did this show. Dear God, we're not even they're literally talking about things that happened in the last 48 hours, basically.
Pretty much. Yeah. Well, I mean, and we've discussst this before. I mean, that's the way the news cycle works now. Is we don't even have a 24-hour cycle or a 12-hour cycle. We've got like basically a 4-hour, if not less than that cycle, where if something I don't know, just speaking like from the perspective as a journalist, I don't know if you find yourself in a similar situation that I do, but it's like, I'll cover an event, I'll go to a press conference, or I'll start working on something that seems, hey, this is a good story, this is worth talking about, this addresses something. And it's like, if you don't have it out literally, in 2 hours, it's become old news. And I think that's been detrimental and helped us, get to the terrifying point that we're at in history, and that like we don't even look back, to something that happened yesterday, because some crazy horrible shit just happened now, and I can't pay attention to yesterday because, oh my God, something I fell further down the hole in the basement.
Which is all like when people like you and I who try to always put news into context, and there's a lot of reporters that try to be like, okay, well, we have to remember that John Bolton was the guy that almost led us into war with Iran back in 2003, and was part of the lying bullshit routine that sounds a lot like this bullshit routine we're doing right now, that led us into the Iraq war that ended with the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. Yeah. And well, by the way, also now we have the person who was the spokesperson for that for President Bush is now on fucking MSNBC as a host. Like, like, we can't talk about this thing. Like, I would love to go on, I forget her name, for her on her show and just be like, so please tell me, how does this all lay out? Because you know this better than anybody else. Like, you know how to send this lie through this media, this form of media, better than anyone else in the fucking goddamn world. You used to work for Palin too. So like, you know this shit.
Yeah.
Like, and that's on MSNBC, the supposed, liberal leftist,
Oh, it's so far left, like, are you fucking kidding me? Just why, how, why?
I don't know.
Neither do I. This is why, this is why, I don't even have anything. I'm just, that's the thing. I mean, I'm exasperated at a lot of points, over this kind of shit. So what else? What are you working on coming up?
I am actually hopefully soon working on and starting another podcast called Isolated Incidents, basically tracking the kind of not just the like the weekly attacks that happen to either people of color or just activists from white supremacists and white nationalists, but also kind of the stories that out them and just kind of talking about them, because the title comes from this conversation I had with a park ranger at Fort Sumter earlier this year. About Charlottesville was just an isolated incident, and so but yeah,
which is an incredible thing to me. And we've this is the kind of thing that should be talked about quite a bit. Just in that, and I'm not going to give too many details, but I was at a press conference today that was about that is related. But there were a lot of mentions of quote unquote lone wolf attacks. But what folks for whatever realize, which I wrote about this for Truth Out a year ago, and other folks have who track these things have said this too, but is that during the 90s, white nationalism moved away from being super organized, thanks to the dissolution of the order, and the White Aryan Resistance and a few others, and advocated, the leaders in these movements, decades ago, advocated for people to take up the mantle of quote lone wolf activism. This does not mean, however, that these people are just exist in a vacuum, and that is such a huge distinction that I don't know that I think people are starting to make it now after Christchurch and some of these other places where there is there's a connection to online organizing, but the reality is like which anybody who's reported on this for years should see is that these groups are all interconnected, and some usually it's one lone actor, but that does not mean that there is not a huge amount of other people waiting in the wings. And that is such a distinction that like I can't stress enough how important it is to recognize that. Because if we don't, people, just like the park ranger, oh, it's an isolated incident, this stuff doesn't really happen. I mean, it also feeds the narrative that people like Tucker Carlson have, which is like, why you could go your whole life and never meet a white nationalist, which is utter bullshit.
No, this is the thing, is that like, unlike what we see in films about what like an Islamic terrorist is or whatever, we're not like, they don't have TNT strapped to their vest, and it doesn't look like the guy from True Lies, with
Yeah. Well. Oh, yeah. Oh, well. No. It's interesting.
But,
No. Bringing up that
modern presence, but
that is it's interesting that you bring that very particular movie up.
yes, that's in the classic.
Back in the 90s, there was a magazine made by neo-Nazis called Resistance Magazine.
Yeah.
And I remember very, very viscerally, and it basically it existed to promote white nationalism and to promote their record label of the same name, which, but this is how they recruited people back in the 90s. And, I was a punk kid back in the 90s, so I remember all of these things.
Yes.
And I remember very specifically in some issue, the author of it, who he went by the name George Eric Hawthorne. I don't know what his real name is. I don't remember. He was the singer of a white nationalist band, but he wrote like a thing about the movie True Lies, and about how while these people are obviously America's enemies, I respect, he said like that he respected the passion of the lead evil character in it, for standing up for whatever. And so when people these days talk about how like, oh well, clearly this group cannot be white nationalists or fascists because they there is this one that one of the guys in the crew has a friend that's not white. That's that's it's not that cut and dry, and it's never been that cut and dry, because ultimately they're looking for any way to gain power. And so they'll do these kinds of things. And so wow, I haven't thought about that in probably 25 years. And here we go again.
And speaking of old stories, I didn't even get to tell I forgot to tell my the first time I ever saw Chris Matthews in person. He was screaming at Joe Scarborough story at the Bush inaugural in 2000.
That had to have been honestly incredible. I can only imagine the decibel level.
They were screaming back and forth to each other, like jovially. It was jovial, but it was clear that it was like not really jovial. It's like, oh, all these rich white people are here. We can't, like all these literally. My buddy C.S. Muncie and I were sneaking our way into the inaugural parade area. When it comes to security, and we had kind of worked our way, which is hilarious because like, I was wearing like a flak, like whatever, like, green jacket that, that when you're 22 years old or whatever, and think is cool.
I know the jacket. I know the jacket.
And also when you're in the as a member of the press or whatever, it's just like, or as a trying to think. I had my credentials that were expired from my aunt's publication, Women and Guns, like hanging around my neck, and we were working our way in, basically in through what ended up being basically the like rich donor section. Every single person around us had, or at least every woman around us had like a clearly like full length fur mink coat, like hats and everything. And it was just like, we stuck out like fucking sore thumbs. And they just, I think that Secret Service, whoever was running that gate, was just like, just go. Just like, it's too embarrassing. Like, it's like, so, but no, it was just like, Joe Scarborough was on at one. No, Joe Scarborough was in the rich donor section because I think he was probably a congressman then. I don't know if it was before or after he killed his intern. Anyway, that didn't happen. That didn't happen. I was just joking, and that's not true. He was just screaming like Chris Matthews back and forth, and it was just like CS and I were just like, "Is that Chris Matt? Is that?" Because we didn't. I don't think we knew who Joe Scarborough was at that point. Like he wasn't. He didn't have Morning Joe, and he was just a random congressman from New Jersey. I forget where he's even from, but he was like, I think he was one term or something too, or so it was like nobody. But I'm like, oh my god, Chris Matthews is screaming at that person. So, and then later on, like I could basically like CS and I like 2 years later when Morning Joe started being a thing. I think it would maybe where it was just like, wait, that was Joe Scarborough he was yelling at. Anyway, he was
He represented the 1st District of Florida.
Florida, yeah, I forgot,
from 95 to 2001.
Oh wow, 3 terms.
Yeah.
Well done.
And also apparently was named in 2011 as one of Time's 100 most influential people in the world. So that's a whole other wow.
And Robert Pattinson is going to be the next Batman, but that's a whole different story.
And that's a whole different podcast for you.
Yes. It just literally just came up on my Facebook, and I'm like, oh, you're fucking kidding me.
I didn't know. I mean, here's the thing, and I know we don't normally do we don't do a lot of we don't stray from politics a lot here. But, you know, I have not liked, and I'll admit I have not seen. I still have yet to see Aquaman, but I've seen the rest of the DC Universe movies, and I have not liked any of them.
Yeah, I like them, but they tell stories that were the comic books that I read as a kid. So like with Doomsday and things like that. So like, and also a little bit of spite, because basically within our audience, there's a whole like just basically hate anything that DC does for the fact that even before it comes out. So like part of it is like, oh, fuck you. Like, yeah, no, I like this. Yeah. Also, you know, one of the problems with, and this is a whole different, again, a whole different story, but it's like one of the problems with a lot of things is that, you know, you go on red carpets and you meet a lot of the actors and people, and then you're like, these people are very likable and very nice. And genuinely, like, there are some TV stars that remember me.
Nice.
Sorry, my dog is connected to my headphones now. But that remember me from like every year when I do red carpets and things like that. And they're like, oh, hey, Zach. And I'm like, how the fuck do you know who I am? I'm behind the camera. And like usually obviously not hiding, but I'm like looking through the thing. And so it's just like one of those, I'm like, that's insane. That's completely insane. You are just,
you know, though,
Black, like, by the way, if you never watched Black Lightning, you should catch up on it. It's on Netflix. It is fucking fantastic. It's about an African-American superhero family. And like the first season's fucking brilliant. It deals with like a lot of protest stuff and like has reminiscence of Ferguson and whatever. They were all very, very impressed that I had covered Ferguson too. That was like one of those weird things.
But
anyway, but yeah.
Well, yeah, it's weird because, you know, I mean, I think it's plenty on topic because it at least crosses over into journalism because, you know,
yeah,
I mean, I do mostly politics, but, you know, I do cover, you know, C2E2 every year here in Chicago. And sometimes I do Wizard World, which are our two big, you know, fandom conventions. And I do that because, you know, they're a lot of fucking work. You know, that's 3 days running around, you know, completely bonkers. But it's like a mental break for me. Where
oh my god, like,
yeah. Like, I mean, this year I got to you know, I got to photograph David Tennant on a panel, and it was like, you know, the greatest thing ever. I like geeked out forever about it because I was just like, oh, it's the doctor, the doctor, you know.
Yeah, no, one of the reasons one of the reasons I think that I keep getting called back from comicbook.com when I work for them is the fact that like while everyone else is stressed out and freaking out about like how stressful this is, like, you know, you cover New York Comic-Con or San Diego and it's fucking bonkers insane. I'm sure CE2E2 is like very similar. And like you just moved and I'm just like, dude, like last week, like literally most of the time, so first time I covered it for comic book was I was actually running back and forth late at night and covering Occupy Wall Street. So like I would cover, you know, 8-10 hours of New York Comic-Con and then basically hand over all my cards and stuff like that for the video stuff, and then run down to grab a cab and run down to cover Occupy Wall Street for a couple hours, come back, pass out for 4 hours, and cycle repeat for like 4 days. And then it was Ferguson, I think, that I had just come back to for when I covered another New York. Literally, I think I flew back like and then drove down. Like I flew back, landed, picked up my my reporter Russ, and then we drove down to New York. And I forget what the last time was. Oh yeah, no, it was Charlottesville was like 3 weeks. I covered that, and then 3 weeks later I covered New York Comic-Con again. And so every time I'm just like, this is great. Like,
this is so less stressful.
Photograph gorgeous fucking people and like talk to like extraordinarily interesting people, and and things like that. We're just like, yeah, no one's trying to shoot me. The only problem is that like we were joking about like security being a thing, and like security used to be a much bigger thing. I mean, I think the fact that like the site I work for now is like big enough that like I don't get much hassle with things. But like I remember the first couple of years that I was covering it, like I would cover, a New York City protest, and NYPD is, its own thing. And then cover New York Comic-Con, and like security would be like, no. And I like immediately your hackles go up, and like you go up to like a 10 immediately. And I'm like, oh, no. I can't go to a 10 to this random volunteer, like 55-year-old random volunteer who just like has too much power, and somebody told him don't let anybody in through this door, and forgot to say except for press. I'm like getting into somebody's face, and I'm like, who saw Zach?
Yeah, I had an experience like that at C2E2 this year, where I was like, I have had to go through less, and it really did. It sort of felt, and I was kind of joking, but I'm kind of half serious, because again, like you said, you kind of like square up, and you're like, you immediately are like, what the fuck?
Yeah,
but then you're like, wait a minute, this is, it's all volunteer run. Who knows how much training any of these people have, if any at all. But I was like, I went through, I've gotten through Secret Service clearance faster than I got into this panel. That's weird.
I remember. Oh, that's actually what it was. It was like they had no idea what they were doing, and they actually had security, so it wasn't volunteer. Like last year, they decided for one day they were doing bag check for every single person, and then doing like all this huge level of other security check. I don't know what their idea was. Like just some manager decided that that's what they were doing. And like we're going through it, and I'm just like, oh my fucking God. Like I was complaining about something, and somebody ahead of me had heard me complaining to the person next to me. And he's just like, well, what do you know about? Or no. It was actually the security guard had heard me. He's like, well, what do you know about security? And I'm like, well, and just listen up. I'm like, well, I've gone through every single level of security. I've spent hours in lines chatting with Secret Service about these things. And I'm like, something tells me I have more experience than you. And like, that didn't go over well, but I got through the line still. Because
I mean, at this point, I'm just, I've resigned myself. I'm like, I have to go through the line, whatever. But like, it's just, I'm like, no, man, like I've taken photos of people who have levels of security that like, I mean, dudes in, guys in full combat gear have, I've been around them. Like, so
like I've got half a dozen Secret Service security passes. I've been within reaching distance of the president of the United States, and like any number of senators and congressmen. And we're like, I'm really I think, well, anyway, I could teach a class on like how to go through it at this point. Like,
yeah, I mean, it's just, and maybe that's a whole other thing we should do, how to, media relations for, for journalists, or, media relations for volunteers and other staff dealing with journalists, done by journalists.
I'd actually wanted to do that, but anyway, but that's, it's just, basically hope to God that you're going to an event, and hope to God that it's being guarded by the Secret Service, because they're the only fucking goddamn professionals in the business. If it's random local cops in Baton Rouge, or was it in oh my God, what's the town that the one was in Mississippi that I covered? But I was in Mississippi, and like I got through the line, and it was just taking forever and forever and forever. And then I like noticed, I'm like, oh fuck, there's only one Secret Service guy, and all the other ones are local Mississippi cops. And I'm like, that's why everything took for so fucking long. Every time it's like Secret Service is just like, I know what to do because I put my bag over there, and like the dog sniffs it. They do their check, and I walk through, and we chat and joke a little bit about different things. I tell this one story that I tell every single Secret Service agent. They laugh, and then we go, and that's it. Like,
no, I mean, that's, that's the thing, man. Like, you just, it's I don't know. Anyway, we've gotten way off topic here, and we've gone on, I think, for long enough for this particular episode.
Yeah.
But we should come back, you know, soon, next week, early, because here in Chicago, if you want to do another installment of What the Hell is Happening in Chicago, we're about to have our Monday is the inauguration of newly elected mayor Lori Lightfoot, the first African American woman to be mayor of Chicago, and our new city council, which has about half a dozen Democratic Socialists of America on it, and so it's good. Honestly, that has been super wild, and you know, we've talked about it before, but I'm sure I'll have a lot to say about it next week. Once things are in, and it's like, okay, we're here. It's happening.
Yeah, no, I'm covering on Saturday. I'm covering Joe Biden's official campaign launch in Philly, which I guess this is a thing now where you do a campaign launch and then you wait like a month and then you do another campaign launch, because Beto is going through his relaunch right now, getting a haircut on live stream.
We're doing rebranding. That's right.
Yeah, and then on Monday I might actually cover a Trump thing, another Trump event in somewhere in Pennsylvania, and then it might be in Ohio for a white supremacist rally in Dayton on the 25th. So haven't figured out whether I can actually get there or not, but we're gonna try. So,
well, if you know, you should tell the people where they can send money to you. So you can
yes, you can go to patreon.com/ZD Roberts, which that also helps fund this podcast. It helps fund Visu.News hosting and everything like that. And Aaron, where can people find a place to support you?
You can. I am also on Patreon at patreon.com/Aaron Cynic, and you can find me on Twitter at Aaron Cynic. You can also find me on Instagram at Aaron Cynic. And you know, if you want to PayPal me some cash too, that's cool too. I have one of those, and I'll send you the link.
Totally. Yeah, and if you just want to like mail me like cash in an envelope, like I can give you a PO box, or if you just anyway, send me random gold.
You know, a secret location where people should bury money in.
I can meet you. Yeah, just give me X mark. Send me a pirate map. I will put on my Congressman Crenshaw eye patch and go out there. Yes, I am mocking a war veteran. Fuck that asshole. Anyway, a Bitcoin. I'll take I don't know, liters of human blood that I can trade in. I know I'm kidding, but yeah. Anyway, we should probably end on that point. Anyway, this has been episode 27 of the Visu.News podcast with Aaron Cynic and myself, Zach D. Roberts. And thanks again. And hopefully we'll be back in a week or less. Yeah. Hopefully. Yeah. Anyway.